So today we're going to talk about graphing linear equations, and this is chapter 3, section 2, and it matches the sheet that is titled the same. So we're looking at putting a linear equation onto a graph. And if you remember, linear equations have a y and an x. So let's look at a graph and let's just refresh our memory of where and how to plot points. So if we have the point 2, 3, that's in the format of x, y. This is my x-axis and my y-axis. So I'm going to go a positive 2 in the x-axis and a positive 3 in the y-axis. And that is the point 2, 3. Well, when we graph equations, we can do this two different ways. For instance, number 1 looks like that. Y equals 2/3 x plus 1. Well, you can use a table of values, and you probably started doing this way early on in middle school, where you said, well, what would the point be if x was a -3 or a 0 or a 1 or a 3? And then what you did was you plugged that in. So let's plug in x. And that would mean the 3's would cancel, and y would be -2 plus 1, which is -1. So one point on this line is -3, -1. Well, let's plug in the 0 for x. So that would mean y would be 0 plus 1, which is 1. So we have the second point, 0, 1. And then let's plug in the 1. So that means 2/3 plus 1, which is 5/3. It's 2/3 plus 3/3. That gives you 5/3. Or it's 1 and 2/3 if that's easier to graph, which sometimes it is. And then if you let x equal 3, the 3's cancel, so you have 2 plus 1, so y is 3. So then you have another point, 3, 3. So by using what we call a table of values, we could get some points, and we do realize that the x could keep getting smaller. It could go all the way to a negative infinity, and the x could keep getting bigger and go to a positive infinity. So this makes a line. So when you plot these points on a graph, you get a line. So I'm going to do myself a favor, and I'm going to write these points at the bottom. And then I'm going to get rid of this because I need to switch this into a graph. You can rewind if you need to see that. And now I'm going to look at a graph. So let me go ahead and get my x and y axis on here. And remember that the y axis is the vertical one that goes straight up and down, and your x-axis is the horizontal one that goes left and right. And now let's plot those points. So the first point was -3, -1, and that's going to be right there. And then we had 0, 1, and then we had 1 and 1 2/3. So that's probably about right there, pretty close to it. And then we had 3, 3. Okay, well, if I was to connect those, that line would look like that. So this graph is a visual representation of this linear equation. Now, what I want to talk to you today about is y equals mx plus b. So y equals mx plus b is what's called slope-intercept form. So for slope-intercept form, I'm going to change my mind on that, and I'm going to save slope-intercept form for a later lesson because I don't want to overwhelm you with information in this one. And so we're going to leave that at where we were. But I want you to skip to the last part of that worksheet. Let's go to number 15. Oh, I'm sorry. Let's back up 1 second. I apologize. If you look at the pictures there for number 1, you can see that the correct answer is C. Now, the way that you're going to find that correct answer for sure is, for one, you're going to look at the angle of the line, so it definitely cannot be D. But then we need to choose between A, B, and C. So look right here where this line crosses over the y-axis at 1. And if you compare that to the other graphs, A will cross at -1, B will cross at -2, and C is the only one that crosses at a +1. So the answer to that would have to be C. Now let's go to number 15. So in number 15 we have this equation. And this makes it a little challenging to graph, because when you plug things in, you have to do a little solving. So let's just go ahead and make our table of values with our x and our y. And -1, 0, and 1 are some really good numbers to plug in for x because they're easy to multiply and add by. You can use other numbers if you want. So if I pretend that x is -1, I get something that looks like that. This is when I let x equal -1. Well, I have to solve for y now. So add 1 to both sides. So 4y equals 1. Divide by 4. So y equals 1/4. So the way this linear equation is written, the format that it's in, makes it a little difficult to use a table of values. Now we will learn an easier way to do this, but for now that is the only tool that we have. So let's let x equal 0. So that means 0 plus 4y equals 0. So 4y equals 0. And when you divide by 4, y equals 0. So we have 2 points now. We have -1, 1/4. We have 0, 0. And if we were to let x equal +1, I'll just do that over here. That would be 1 plus 4y equals 0. Subtract 1, so 4y equals -1. Divide by 4, and so y would equal -1/4. So we have our third point, which is 1, -1/4. Now, when I say let x equal these values, I mean in the original linear equation that you were given in number 15, that's the number we're working on, you're going to substitute that value in for x, and then to figure out what y was, we solved that equation for y. Okay, so now let's put them on a graph. So x plus 4y equals 0 has a graphical or a visual or a pictorial representation, and it is a line. And let's figure out what it is based on the 3 points that we found. Now, could we find 6 points? Yes. Could we find different points than the ones we found and use those? Yes. Anywhere you go, it's going to be on this line. And all you have to do is connect the dots. So I have -1, 1/4. So -1, 1/4 is going to be about right there. And I have 0, 0. And I just put negative 1 1/4 in the wrong place. It's a negative 1 positive 1/4, so it's above that x-axis. And I had 0 0, and I have positive 1 negative 1/4. So that's about right there. And now I realize that that might be a little bit off because I'm using teeny tiny measurements here on a big thick line. But that is what that graph is going to look like. Make sure you get your arrowheads on there because that line goes on forever. Now if we look at the pictures, A, B, C, or D, A is angled upward, it cannot be A. D is angled upward, pointed up, cannot be D. So if you look at B and C, clearly the only one that could be is B. So in all of these, you're going to use a table of values, then plot the points, and choose the correct graphical representation.